It is now 7 o'clock. It is the top of the hour. I can now start my live in Cheshire Socialites. So, welcome anybody who's watching this. As I've already said, if you're watching this on replay, if you've got any questions, please pop in there, hashtag replay, and tag me in at Marcus Matthews, and I will answer your questions. By all means, as we're talking stress, just to make you aware, if you don't know who I am, my name is Marcus Matthews. I am a clinical hypnotherapist, rapid transformational therapist, and life coach. I'm also a member of the celebrity therapist Marissa Peer's team. So, so I've got lots of experience in this area. And more importantly, when it comes to stress, I can map my journey exactly from stress to being suicidal. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, but it's not going to be morbid. I'm going to be giving you lots of tips and tricks. So, first question, what is stress? Well, stress is a completely natural function, and I'll talk a bit about science here. And I've mentioned this before. Thank you for watching, whoever's watching. I'll talk a bit about the science of stress. And stress is natural. So when we're in a stressful situation, when we're in a new situation, the chemicals in our body, normally cortisol and epinephrine, will go into our body to allow us to get through that stressful situation. Traditionally, stress was there to get us out of danger. So we see a tiger, we can run. Okay, but obviously now those stresses aren't as much. They might be exams, they might be financial, they could be all sorts of different things, but our body is still reacting in that same way to stress. Now, I want to talk about positive stress. If we are completely chilled out all of the time, all right, then we're not growing. If you take a plant, so let's have a look at a plant. So you put a seed in the ground. I talk about this a lot. The seedling pushes itself through. That's stressful, pushing itself through the soil. It then comes out and it's a bit weak. And as it's coming out, the wind and the rain batter it and it gets buffeted from side to side, and that strengthens it. It strengthens the roots and it anchors the roots down so that it can grow, and that stress will then allow it to be flexible in the wind. So stress is a part of nature. It's part of our everyday lives, and stress is a good thing. Okay, if you want to learn something new, you have to go through a functional process, which will mean you have to do some work to get there. So what happens is, when we go through stress and we're learning something new, our mind will fire new neurological connections in our brain. Okay, and over time they create synaptic connections that then create that as a memory. Now, the environment in which we do that is really, really important. So if you are in an environment where you feel that you're supported and you feel that you're safe, because your mind is there to keep you alive. So if it thinks that you're safe, then that stress can actually be a positive experience. There's a lot of reasons why people love going to the gym, and a lot of people go, why can you go to the gym? That's, why do you want to go and do an ultra marathon? That looks hellishly painful. But they've built that stress and that tolerance over time, and it becomes enjoyable. So the stories they tell themselves about that experience is, it might be hard, but good stress, so going to the gym, actually creates amazing chemicals in our brain. Serotonin, I can't think of any of the others, but let's go a little bit filthy with this. When you have sex, that can be stressful. I don't mean negative stressful, but you stress your body. Your blood vessels expand, and that can be an amazing experience. Okay, so stress can be really, really good for us, and it is really, really good for us if we want to grow and we want to excel. However, what is negative stress? Well, negative stress is pretty much exactly the same thing, same chemicals, but the environment is different. And the environment in our mind is different. So when we create negative stress, we connect stories to the same feelings, but we don't feel safe. Now, when that happens, on occasions where, let's think of an example. So you go to a new job and you're a bit out of your depth, and actually your boss is not very nice, is not very sympathetic, and you don't like that, but luckily there's a support structure in place, and you go and speak to somebody, and then you get moved to a different department, and you've got a new boss, and they're lovely. Okay, that would be negative stress, but it's negative stress where you've been able to cope with it. So when we look at mental health services, when we look at support for stress, anxiety, depression, and we take things like counselling or even peer support, um, when we're doing that, we're working on a logical level. So if we don't have an underlying anxiety, if we don't have any underlying issues that have happened in our environment in the past, often just speaking to somebody about it can lift us out of that and give us the coping and management mechanisms to understand why that's happened. And that's really important. And that's why I would never say that things like CBT, um, talking therapy are bad. They're not. They're the right tool for the right job. Okay. So one of the things that often happens is that when we start that spiral of stress, which turns to anxiety, um, it can be very much a slow process that can happen over decades. So my own story was very much that it took pretty much 30 years before I broke. And in between that time of when you have that stress, that anxiety, you may put in coping mechanisms. So if it was jobs, you might go from job to job to job to job. You never settle. You don't feel as though you belong. It might be that your coping mechanism is a negative in regards to you drink, you smoke, you take drugs. It might even be a negative also that you use other mechanisms like going to the gym, which is really, really good, but you're not getting to the foundation, you're not getting to the root cause of why you get that anxiety, but you cope and you manage with it. So a lot of the things that people are told about dealing with stress is more about coping and managing. And that's not what I do. I look at root cause. So I'm going to give you an example, a bit of a story, I suppose, of how we can put that into context. So I want you to imagine that when you were born, you were a small little fish, and you were born as a small little fish in a lake. And when you're born in that lake, your lungs weren't as big, and you could breathe in and everything fine, and the water looked clear. Over the time that you are growing as that fish, you start to get stressed. Maybe your gills start to get infections. Maybe your food source isn't as prevalent, and you've got to go looking around. And I want you to imagine that if that was the stress that we're under, you'd go to seek the places where you could relax. So you might hide somewhere, or you might there might be a few people that say, "Oh, go over here; it's a lot better." But you're still not great. You're not in flow. You're not swimming through. You don't feel healthy, but it becomes familiar. So your environment becomes familiar. So you think that's all there is. So I want you to imagine that what's actually happening is that further, maybe upstream, there is a chemical plant. And next to the chemical plant, there is a pipe. And in that pipe, there is a pinhole in one of the pipes. And out of that pipe, every now and again, is a bit of poison that comes into the water. And to the untrained eye, you can't see it. And that poison is dripping into the water source. It's dripping into the water source. And as that's dripping into the water source, you don't see that the chemical composition of the water is changing. The small algae, the smallest animals, are starting to die. And the water is starting to get poisoned, and it's causing you stress. But that stress, as it gets worse and worse and worse, starts to become distress, which then starts to become uncomfortable. Pains, panic attacks, maybe even going as far as PTSD, suicidal thoughts, turning into dis-ease. You don't want to be there. Disease. Because when your body starts to flow with chemicals like cortisol, when you become stressed and it's permanent, and epinephrine, it will actually have an impact on the cells in your body. And those cells and the mitochondria, which are the batteries in your cells, will then start to not be able to reduce properly. So I want you to imagine, if you're thinking about stress, you're tightened up. Just imagine all of the blood vessels now are trying to work even harder. You're not relaxed, they can't flow. So you become distressed. And if you stay in that tense mode, if you take like an elastic band and you stress that elastic band and hold it there and keep holding it and pulling it and pulling it and pulling it, it will lose its elasticity. And I've mentioned that before. So imagine that this poison is dripping in, and that poison in your life may be your culture, your social background, your workplace, your home background. There are so many things that can drip into our lives that are not positive and we don't realize them. So I want you to imagine that you look at our mental health system, our systems that we've got in place. So we've got something at the top here where we might need to, we're feeling a little bit uncomfortable, we can have a chat. What's the next level down to that? Well, the next level down to that is pills, maybe psychotherapy if you can get it. But actually, it never gets rid of the feeling of stress or anxiety or depression. So I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine that that same fish is swimming around, but every now and again it gets taken out and it can view its environment differently. So imagine that you were that fish and you're feeling a little bit stressed, feeling a little bit under the weather. Maybe you're getting a bit anxious. In our society, we're seeing that to go and see a therapist or a coach or to get help is not a good thing. We talk about it's good to talk. All right, and I've mentioned this before, but actually culturally it's not. We're still living back in the dark ages and we've all got to man up and get on with it. Because remember, stress is good for you. But it's only good for you if it's in a positive environment. But if it's in a negative environment, so like fish in the poisoned lake, then it's not going to be good for you. But imagine if the fish could do this. Every now and again, it could be lifted out of the water and it could then scan its environment. It might see the drip coming from the pipe and it can seal that. And then over time, the water will clear, the algae will come back, and it'll start to live in an abundant environment. And often we don't get the opportunity to do that. And we certainly don't get the opportunity to be told of all the different options. So I want to put that into some context in regards to my story, because one of the reasons why I did this live today on stress was actually I didn't find rapid transformational therapy, the therapy that I now do, the therapy that I used personally, until I was forced to. So for those of you who don't know the story, very quickly, 2016 I was working at Chester Station, ended up getting assaulted as a police officer, didn't get the support, so my environment wasn't right to resolve the feelings that I was feeling, which led to me feeling suicidal, and I ended up getting sectioned, and the help wasn't there. And funnily enough, I was speaking to a client recently who was a police officer, and there is a charity that the police have. It's an independent charity, and when she was going through a similar situation to me, she went to this charity for help, for support, because the support that she was getting was just a tick box process. But because she was under the community mental health team at the time, the private company that looks after that works with them said, oh, we can't help you. And this is often the case, that when you look at mental health services, when you look at people who've got anxiety and stress, often their websites, they're signposting services, and often those signposting services mean you then need to fill in a load of forms, which then means you may get access to some help, but actually it's really laborious and can take time. And if your stress and anxiety is at such a level, often you can't cope with that. You don't need that. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips now, and this links in with what I do. If you saw the last live about when we put people into hypnosis, so if you're feeling a little bit stressed now, I want you to do something. is I want you to use a 5 second rule. Now, somebody called Mel Robbins came up with this. So, whenever you feel stressed, whenever you think you're going to react, whenever you think you're going to act on something, give yourself 5 seconds. So, if you can feel yourself having a panic attack, if you can feel yourself, I just want you to stop and count to 5. But the best way you can do this is by breathing to 5. So, I'm going to show you really deep breaths, and I'll tell you why in a second. So you're feeling stressed, you're feeling panicky, you don't know what to do. Try and find yourself a space and just breathe in 5 times, in and out. So all you're going to do is just take a deep breath in, close your eyes if you need to, and breathe out. Take another deep breath in and breathe out. Take another deep breath in and breathe out. And allow your shoulders to relax and your body to relax. Take another deep breath in and breathe out. And take another deep breath in and breathe out. And even by doing that myself, I can feel that I've completely chilled. I've gone a little bit woo as well. So by taking that 5 seconds out and taking those breaths, what actually happens is those deep breaths start to reduce the cortisol in your brain. So if you'd seen any of my other lives, I talked about the prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, your social brain, the analytical part of your brain. When you become stressed and you go into fight or flight mode, what happens is that part of your brain starts to shut down, because we don't need to be able to do algebra when we're stressed and in fight or flight mode. It's of no use to us whatsoever. It wants to activate a little bit in the base of our brain called the amygdala. It's our reptilian brain, which just happens to be 75% negative. And this is why when people get angry, they flip their head. They flip their top. And we reveal the amygdala. We reveal our inner caveman or woman. And when we breathe, what happens is that those stress hormones, epinephrine, cortisol, that start to flood our body, can easily get put in control just by breathing. And if anybody's an Ariana Grande fan, and you read my book, I talk about this in my book, is that her song Breathe, listen to the words. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm certainly not going to sing it. But she talks about, people telling her to medicate, telling her to do this, telling her to do that. And all she needed to do was breathe. So Jay Shetty talks a lot about this in his book that's just come out, Think Like a Monk. And he talks about a 10-year-old boy when he first started monk school teaching a 5-year-old. And Jay Shetty asks him and says, what is the first thing you learn at monk school? And he says the first thing you learn at monk school is to breathe, because the first thing that you do when you're born is breathe. The last thing you do when you die is stop breathing. So the only constant actually in your life is the breath. And this is why if anybody does yoga, so if anybody does yoga, give me a thumbs up, give me a comment. If anybody does yoga, you'll know that actually the asanas are not the important thing. It's actually the breath. It's the breathing. You're actually working from the inside out, not the outside in yoga. And that's the same in Pilates. It's the same with anything, actually. The breath is so important because it gets that oxygen into your blood. It gets you stable. So one of the reasons why that happens is and why we go to other things. So let's take smoking, because as I say, I've just started this new smoking group. When I work with my smoking clients, I say this a lot. It's nothing about nicotine. If you're a smoker and you are dying for a fag, what's the first thing you do? Breathe. It's not the smoking that is relaxing you. It's actually the breath. It's actually breathing. It's actually getting rid of that cortisol. And we do that because we want to stay alive. So often with things like smoking, drinking, whatever it is, it's nothing to do with the smoking. It's actually to do with connection. So remember, the mind is all about survival, and we connect to the things that we believe will keep us alive. And this is why addiction happens, it's not to do with the addiction, it's to do with a lack of connection. So we connect to the things that we think will keep us alive. And when you can understand the root cause of why you do that, that's why giving up alcohol or reducing alcohol intake, smoking, drugs is actually quite easy with rapid transformational therapy, because we find the root cause of why you do it. So we don't try and cope or manage it or replace it with something else. We get to the root cause and then you choose what you want to do with that. So just moving forward with that, I just wanted to talk about kind of my journey, which was all about stress. And I'm going to talk about that small element. So what happened was I was at Chester Station. This incident happened. I got punched in the face about 2 times, managed to get the guy on the ground. I had no backup. That was positive stress. I was happy in my job. I knew what I was doing. I was a good cop. I've had loads of, not fights, never been hit actually in 10 years. That's the first time I've been punched. But got the better of the guy. Cheshire police turned up. We locked the guy up, and we dealt with it. And you get that I got the bad guy moment, and you know that colleagues are around you. But actually, if you don't know, I work for British Transport Police, not Cheshire Police. So Cheshire Police were amazing. But what happened was my colleagues at BTP took a long time to get there. Now, there was a particular sergeant who's left now that was very, very good at the time. But actually, the aftercare that happened was non-existent. So what happened subconsciously, and I didn't know this at the time, was I felt as though I'd been rejected by the people who were supposed to keep me alive. So actually, if we were looking at this in a clinical sense normally, and we were looking at the PTSD, I didn't have it, but I had the symptoms of PTSD because I refused to be labelled. They would go, oh, well, it must have been to do with the assault. It must have been to do with the assault because it was after the assault that this all happened. But it wasn't, because the root cause and reason to why I became ill, why I became distressed, why I had the disease that was these suicidal thoughts, was actually when I was 6. So if you don't know this story, when I had the RTT and I went back to this scene was when I was 6. My brother threw a frisbee into the water. I could swim. It was fine. I went to get it and a wave came over. I got dragged under and I got panicked. I got stressed. I thought my life was, I was going to die. My dad and my brother pulled me out of the water and then started laughing at me, as most blokes would. Subconsciously, though, what I said is, I'm going to prove myself to be a big enough man. I'm going to be big enough. I'm going to be strong enough. I'm going to prove now. So every time I was in situations where I felt I didn't fit in, it took me right back to that 6-year-old. So my stress, my anxiety that built up, or the stress and anxiety, it wasn't mine, that built up over all of those years was not actually me as a 20-year-old, me as a 35-year-old, me as a 40-year-old, whatever it was. It wasn't me. It was a small child. And I often speak to clients, and of recent, when I've said this, nobody watches Harry Potter. So for the Harry Potter fans out there, when Voldemort's soul, he puts them into Horcruxes. Okay, so he takes part of his soul so he can't die into Horcruxes. And the premise of the film is that Harry has to go and find all the Horcruxes, kill them so they can kill Voldemort. But I want you to take the same premise, that when you're growing up through all your life, when you get a stressful situation in a negative environment, a marker gets put in your body, which we call a feeling. And it's a little bit like taking little bit of our soul, a little bit of our spirit, and capturing it in time. And you can imagine if you're shaving all of these parts of your soul, your spirit, who you are, off, and you're putting them all over the place, you're actually not left with much. So what we do in RTT and rapid transformational therapy, when I'm dealing with anxiety and PTSD and stress, or even smoking, because remember, most things come down to 3 things: I'm not good enough, I'm different, that's not available to me. They're just stories that we've connected to these feelings in the past. So when we're showing up, and try this, if you get somebody who's been quite emotional, or somebody's been quite angry towards you, and you don't like it, I'll give you a tip. Look at them and go, oh, that's your inner 5-year-old that's showing up. Because they can't cope. They're under stress. We are naturally not angry people. We are naturally not sad people. That isn't our state. And what I found was that with me, was when I would have moments of anger, when I'd have moments of not feeling good enough, it wasn't me at that age, it was me, a younger me. And what we do is we carry these stories with us. So 100% of my clients, when they come to me, will go, I feel like this because of, and I'll actually tell you a story. We've got 5 minutes to go. I'm going to tell you a story of how significant this is. I'll tell you 2 stories, 2 different things. I'm not going to name the people. They're not in this group, so it's perfectly fine. So I had a client who came to me who it was in her 30s. When she was 14, she was raped. If we were going to look at that in regards to dealing with that CBT or whatever, and she did, what did they do? They looked at the rape and said, that was when you were 14, and they looked at coping mechanisms and all the rest of it. However, when we did the therapy, the rape actually didn't come up. There were scenes around that time, but it wasn't the rape. And what actually happened was when she was 6, she was in class and she got shouted at by a teacher and she was made to feel stupid. The feeling that she felt then was exactly the same feeling afterwards. It was not to do with rape, it was to do with control. And it was to do with the fact that she didn't feel that she had control when she was in that classroom because it was a teacher. And she didn't have control, obviously, when she was being raped. The feeling was the same. The stories were completely different, or the incidents were completely different. So when we got rid of the feeling that attached itself to control, it didn't negate that she was raped. It didn't negate the fact that she was 6, but she could put context around it and move on with her life. Equally, I had another client who had got borderline personality disorder, and she came to me. She tried everything, and she'd had a relatively good life. Great parents, no issues, and she'd even trained with Vidal Sassoon. So she had a really good life, but she had these moments of anxiety, of depression, of this, BPD. And she couldn't understand it. She'd had talking therapy, she was on medication. So what she did is we did the session, and her significant scene was when she was 2. And funnily enough, well, not funnily enough, it's tragic, but what came to is that when she was 2, she was raped. She was raped. But again, it was about control or lack of control, which linked the mind to the feeling about survival. Because if we don't have control in our lives, then it's very difficult for us to move on. And that links directly back to stress. Because whether it be positive stress or negative stress, so let's take positive stress and control. You're in the gym, somebody's teaching you how to do a press up and you can't do it, but you can see other people can. You're not in control of being able to easily push their arms up and down, but in the right environment, with the right support, with the right techniques, you'll be able to smash those press ups out in no time. But in a negative environment, you'll give up. We often look to the outside and we blame our parents, we blame our situation, we blame our family. But actually, the environment is not outside of you. It's the environment that's in here. It's the stories that you connect to the feelings that you have that create the stress. And that's really empowering, and it's really powerful, because what it means is with the right support, with the right help, you can find the understanding of why the environment in your mind is manifesting the environment outside of you. However, what that does mean is you've got to step into a place that you don't have control over. You need to take action, you need to take choice, and you need to trust and step forward that as soon as you realize that you create everything, then you have the ultimate control. And then you can start to take any stress in your life, look for the lessons, and move forward. So that's my 30 minutes up. And I hope this has helped. If you need any help, if you need to speak to me, if you want to find out more, put some comments in. You can go to my website, which is makeyourlifecount.co.uk. There's some videos about what I do. I've got my Finding Your Power group on Facebook, which is facebook.com/groups/finding your power. I've also got my new smoking group, and I'll put all the groups and everything in the comments on this video. But get in touch and know that stress doesn't have to be part of your life, and it certainly doesn't have to control your life. The only thing you need to do is make the decision, draw that line in the sand and say, is the pain that I am in now more or less painful than actually reaching out and getting the help that I need? So I hope you've enjoyed this series of lives that I've done. As I say, pop some likes in, pop some comments in, and please share this with people, because actually everybody's going through a tough time at the moment, and this might just help. So speak to you all soon, and I'll pop some comments in with any links and any help that people might have, and I'll speak to you all soon. Bye bye.